Chapter 1. "This must be the place," the Monterey County Patrolman Jerry Clark said to his partner, wheeling the car over to the curb. 517 Chapman Street. Stuffing the slip of paper into his top pocket, he eased his lanky frame out of the patrol car. Both men walked up the gravel drive to the front door. "A neighbor says she's been hearing kids crying from the house for the last 4 days," Peterson said, wiping his forehead. "Let's get this over with and break for dinner. It's already getting dark, and I'm beat." The two officers stood on the front porch, casually examining the door and windows while waiting for someone to answer. "Nobody home," Peterson said, after repeated knocks. "What do we do now?" Clark scratched his head, considering the nature of the complaint and the state of his stomach, in that order. He checked the note from the dispatcher again, verifying the address. These routine patrols on the behalf of some concerned citizen always increased in the summer, and they were always boring. "Somebody could still be in there. Check the windows." The two men began their inspection, working in opposite directions around the house. "Hey, Clark, I found one!" Peterson yelled from around the corner. Clark trudged across the dry, withered yard, noticing the utter desolation of the place. Where the garden hose should have been was only a rusted faucet. "Kids play here?" he thought to himself disapprovingly. "Too dirty to see much inside, though," Peterson said. "Maybe we should open it." He grunted as he and his partner worked to raise a window at the southeast corner of the little building. Clark noticed the peeling paint and the dead mosquitoes cluttering the windowsill just inside. As Peterson squeezed into the living room and swung his legs onto the bare floor, he grimaced as the stale, pungent air rushed past his nostrils toward the newly created exit. Frowning, he rested his hand unconsciously on his holster. He stood for a moment, holding the window open for his partner. "Jesus! What is that smell?" Clark spoke loudly, certain by now that no one was in the house. "Damn! Must not have paid the bill." Clark flipped the light switch on and off, out of habit. Each room was only dimly lit from what little light penetrated from outside. Padding carefully through the house, the two patrolmen investigated the deserted rooms, noticing signs of recent habitation. The inner hall of the forlorn apartment opened into a weathered hardwood floor and table that looked like a dining room. It was dim with age, its planks covered with innumerable stains, though many of them looked fairly recent. The kitchen cabinet doors near the floor were all open. Debris and curiously dented canned goods lay scattered across the linoleum. In one corner of the kitchen was some excrement from an unknown house pet, probably the dog. Peterson whistled for the animal. No response. He noticed bathroom tissue strewn among the mounds. Vagrants, maybe? Walking back to the living room, the patrolman noticed shreds of magazines and crayons lying at random. It looked like somebody had been running a daycare center. Peterson saw that the female photos had been scribbled on and torn from their original bindings. Odd. Very odd. Books and magazines were strewn in every room, and above all, that smell. The whole house seemed weird and unsettling. "Hey, Clark, come here. I think I found our suspect." Clark rounded the corner of the dark bedroom, then snapped on his flashlight, throwing grotesque shadows against the thick woolen curtains that cloaked the windows. The light glinted first off the badge of his partner, then onto a very small and very dirty little boy, sitting in a corner of the room, watching both men and staying absolutely still. "Hey, son, don't be afraid." Clark knelt beside the child as Peterson switched on his own flashlight and edged closer to what he took to be the closet door, the apparent source of the stench which had assaulted the officers since they entered the house. He eased the door open and found not a closet, but another small bedroom even darker than the first. "Oh, Jesus, no." Peterson would never forget the moment when he ducked into the room, His eyes and nose were watering from the death-like odor. Walking closer, he flung his hands up instinctively as hundreds of cockroaches flew into his face. They seemed to splatter on Peterson's arms and legs as they rushed past him, disoriented by the flashlight, leaving their nest. In the yellow glow of his light, Peterson could make out the dim outline of a baby's crib. He grimaced as he saw within it the black and motionless form of a child. Peterson stood silently in the tiny room, trying to remember the phone number to the morgue, when he looked one last time at the body and saw one little foot twitch in the near darkness. "It's alive," he whispered, an instant before his throat congested and gagged him. Clark brought the still form into the little boy's bedroom, while Peterson vomited on the other side of the door. Private Lewis Campbell drove the Jeep past the post guardhouse and onto the southbound lane of the new interstate highway, one of many which were springing up amid the new prosperity after the war. Lewis threw his head back and drew a deep breath of spring air, scented with the pine scent of endless columns of trees. He watched hypnotically as the rows of forest clicked past, column and file, column and file. The ranks and files of sun-dappled trees alternately opened and closed as they flew past. He began to daydream, thinking back to the pleasant days of his childhood, spent among trees much like these, in the foothills of North Carolina. The pleasant years of childhood were only 10 years distant, Lewis scarcely 18 even now. Lewis remembered very well what it had been like as a young boy, roaming the woods and the fields. The pleasant memories stopped for Lewis one hot summer day in 1941. He and a companion, Mary Thompson, were enjoying the innocent play of children when a new adventure occurred to the boy. Whispering excitedly to his partner, the two agreed upon the idea. Soon Lou and Mary were marching purposefully across the pasture toward a small outbuilding. The two children would have gone unnoticed, except for the attention of Barbara Sewell, who observed all who passed within the view from her bedroom window. This fact would not have been remarkable, except that Barbara Sewell was known among her peers as the most hateful child in town. She took delight in tormenting other children as frequently as possible, whether it be in the form of petty larceny, slander, or general mischief. It is doubtful whether Barbara ever innocently gazed upon another of her own kind without devising some scheme and working it to the other's disfavor as soon as possible. Barbara could tell the destination of the other two children even as she followed their progress across the valley and decided to investigate, formulating possibilities of blackmail even while flouncing downstairs to the front door. She crept silently up to the outbuilding, avoiding the curtained window. She waited some moments outside, then flung open the door to reveal two very naked children, Lewis fondling Mary's budding breasts, and she, in turn, gazing curiously at his dangling member. "Ah, I'm gonna tell!" Barbara screamed at the top of her voice, slamming the door of the shed instantly in the dazed eyes of the occupants. By the time the unfortunate pair had recovered their dignity, the doorway was already empty, and by the time Lewis pulled on his trousers and leaped outside, the tormentor was already a small moving object racing down the deserted country road. He knew where the road led. First past the Sewells, then Mary's house, then the house of his father, Martin Campbell. Mary and Lewis gathered the clothing, grimly discussing the punishments they knew would inevitably follow. They considered their act as vaguely wrong, but with Barbara Sewell reporting the event, it was sure to be retold in the worst possible light. "What do you think your ma will say?" asked Lewis. "I don't know," said Mary. "I guess she'll tell me to never play with you again." Barbie will make them think we were bad, like she always does. We aren't bad, are we, Louis? Nah, we're not bad, said the boy, buttoning his shirt. But in his mind, he knew what would happen. Yes, he thought, when I walk through the front door, it will be bad. Very bad. Louis' mother and father were rough, hard-working people with little time for foolishness and no tolerance for childish behavior. They both had terrible tempers, and their punishments were swift and often brutal. Louis' mother could leave welts on a backside that could last for a week. Louis had been on the receiving end of her wrath many times, carrying marks like service stripes, but that did not bother him. What bothered him was the prospect of his father getting involved. Louis could bear his mother's wrath because, beneath her crusty exterior, Betty Ann Campbell could see the humanity in a young child's mischief and forgive. Martin was a tall, massive field hand who, when inflamed to anger, could be a killer. He treated all his children like adults, administering adult rewards and adult punishments. He rewarded the children after a long day's work in the field with an all-night campout in the mountains. Misbehavior would receive the full force of his massive fist. Louis was not easily frightened, but as he neared his home, his knees turned to jelly. He squinted in the blinding summer sunlight, looking at something in his front yard. "Oh, no," he whispered. "Daddy is home from the field. There's his truck." Mary knew the terrible significance of this revelation. She began to cry. "Please don't cry, Mary. It'll be all right. You'll see," Louis lied. His mind began to wander into the near future, and he winced at the thought. "Mary," he began, "why don't you go along home now? I'll tell you about it later." He lied again, knowing he wouldn't tell her later. "Promise?" "Promise," he said. Still sniffling, the little girl walked down the road to meet her punishment. Martin Campbell was already standing on the porch. "Louis," he yelled, "you get your ass in here right now." Louis sighed, then walked slowly up the steps. He was glad he had sent Mary away. She wouldn't hear him. Louis took the dreadful punishment, and after a few weeks, nobody could see the bruises that covered his legs and back. But he never forgot the real reason for his humiliation: Barbara Sewell. He plotted revenge. From that day forward, his hatred grew geometrically like a physical organism, extending its reach further and further down the corridors of his mind. The trauma of being discovered in the midst of sex play is one obscure event, soon lost in the sum of daily events accumulated year after year. But in Louis' mind, the event assumed greater and greater proportions. The severity of the punishment helped to mark out this event from the rest. Of all the humbling experiences of childhood, Louis felt the stab of sexual humiliation the worst. After a few years, Mary's family moved away, and Louis was left alone to contemplate his embarrassment and shame. What started as revenge eventually turned into mania. Louis was mentally in a daze, about to cross the center stripe of the highway called sanity. The sexual nature of his crime prompted Louis to seek like means of repayment, should the opportunity arise. When he reached puberty 4 years later, Louis knew the perfect time had arrived. The coming out party for Barbara Sewell had been planned for weeks, her parents sparing no expense to give their lovely daughter a proper introduction to society. Barbara had grown from the skinny little urchin of her childhood into a shapely young woman. Her long black hair now framed a creamy complexion, smoothed back past the petulant, freshly painted lips to her startling green eyes, yet the eyes were still pitiless. In the eyes of Louis Campbell, the vixen of 10 had now grown into a trollop of 14. The party was being readied as Barbara's father called to her from the front porch. "Barb, honey, will you go to the woodshed and get me a screwdriver for this picnic table?" "Sure, Daddy," Barbara replied, lifting her petticoats to jump off the back steps and run out to the shed. A pair of watchful eyes had observed the preparations for quite some time from the nearby woods. As her father spoke, Barbara's visitor ran quickly to the shed, shutting the door behind him. Humming to herself, Barbara opened the woodshed, squinting against the sharp contrast of the dark interior, searching for the tool. From out of the darkness, she heard something move. "Who is it?" she demanded. "Who's there?" she repeated. At that instant, she felt a hand cover her mouth from behind and felt a sharp sensation against her spine. "Hello, Barbara. I've been waiting for you." Lewis Campbell jabbed the screwdriver again, pulling Barbara off her feet as he stepped forward to latch the door from the inside. The lights passed overhead in alternate shades of brightness, light, dark, light, dark. That was all Barbara Sewell could remember as she fought to stay awake, seeing olive-drab walls passing beside her, very close, as if she was going down a corridor. There was a metallic clicking sound she could not identify, and this was one of many things she could not remember. She vaguely remembered the shed. Yes. Reaching for the screwdriver. Being touched by somebody. Yes, Lewis Campbell. He smiled. Oh, such a wicked smile. She hardly knew what to think. And then she went to sleep and woke up again, staggering out of the shed, walking back home, hurting, then looking down to see the front of her dress, all soaked in red like blood. But of course it couldn't be, could it? She remembered Lewis Campbell's face, and he seemed so happy. She could still hear the echoes of his harsh laughter as he stood over her, just laughing and laughing. She thought his face had looked so freakish and distorted that he would never stop laughing. Yes, thought Lewis, as he drove down the interstate toward Monterey, I got my revenge that day. He congratulated himself again for throwing down the screwdriver once he had stripped off her panties and entered her. She could never cry rape after that. Even better, she didn't even get pregnant. Barbara never told anyone, but she avoided Lewis for the next 3 years. Whether she told anyone after that, Lewis didn't care, because by then he had joined the army. It was the perfect crime and the perfect end. But that was not the end. His mind jerked to reality as a train whistle blasted the morning quiet on the California highway. Now, breathing the sweet air, he felt the forces set in motion years ago become restless again. Lewis was laughing as he turned off the highway and onto the asphalt thoroughfare through town. Lewis drove the Jeep past the little neighborhood grocery market at 5th and Main, noticing a girl standing in the midst of several others. He thought he saw Barbara Sewell standing there. The girl was a young woman of medium height, with brown, shoulder-length hair, a pleasant face, and green eyes. He stopped the Jeep, gazing intently. Tammy Ann Osgood had a full figure like Barbara Sewell, but there the resemblance ended. Lewis felt compelled to speak to her, and as he walked up, she glanced sideways to see the tall young man better. She felt urged on by his gaze. He was not handsome so much as commanding. All the features seemed overdrawn yet compelling. She noticed the nose, which was most prominent. She saw the angular planes of his face, broad and rough-hewn, like a woodcutter's rendering. He reminded her of the stolid, simple folk she had known long ago in the hills of western Virginia. Lewis' parents had in fact come from the lonely hamlets west of the Shenandoah River, so isolated that even the Civil War inspired no loyalty among the people, except to each other. The lowering black hills encircled the populace, both embracing and imprisoning them. Nonetheless, the clans had obeyed the biblical injunction to be fruitful and multiply. Insanity, hemophilia, and brain fever flourished amid that dark and desolate landscape. Lewis and Tammy Ann did not know that the Campbells and the Osgoods had lived in the Shenandoah River Valley for the last 200 years. Lewis had been glad to get transferred to California. He was free of those backward people at last. Lewis looked down at Tammy Ann. His tiny eyes squinted against the afternoon glare. "Hi, honey, how you doing?" he said, staring at Tammy Ann as he pulled a cigarette from his shirt and lit it casually. "I'm fine, thank you," the girl replied, impressed at the boy's easy, graceful movements and interested by his smile. "My name's Lewis Campbell," the soldier said. "Lou?" the girl asked, edging closer. "No, Lewis," the soldier said again. "Oh. Want to take a ride in my Jeep? Just down to the gas station and back. It'll be fun." Lewis winked outrageously as the gaggle of girls giggled like geese. "Well, okay," the girl replied, ignoring the giggles as she stepped into the Jeep. Lewis talked with Tammy on the way to the gas station and back, compelled by a curious mixture of friendship, youthful lust, and childhood remembrance. He was civil during their initial meeting and inquired about the possibility of meeting again. The girl assented, and so began an extended relationship which consisted almost exclusively of car trips into the countryside, long isolated walks in nearby Salinas, or picnic lunches at Carmel. Carmel was the scene of one particular outing early in the fall. Lewis and Tammy Ann were stretched out lazily on the close-cropped grass, using the car as a windbreak. Lewis casually leaned over and kissed Tammy Ann on the lips. It was not an unpleasant sensation, and she offered no resistance when the young soldier did it again. Soon they were locked in the sweet embrace of young and passionate love. Lewis was soon so aroused he did not know the girl's thoughts, and he did not care. Tammy Ann was visualizing pleasant thoughts of daisy-covered fields and small honeymoon cottages by the sea. She was dismayed when Lewis' fingers crept slowly up to enclose her breasts through her dress and to rub them violently, but she believed this was boyish fervor. She relaxed as he traced the curve of her thigh, giggling as he delicately traced the outline of the dimple in her knee. The last daisy-scented thought exploded, however, when Lewis shoved his hands roughly downward, stripping the girl naked from her chest to her knees. Having quickly unfastened his pants with the same hand that ripped off her panties, Lewis threw himself into the girl's groin, exhaling a simultaneous groan of relief. The romantic illusion the girl had been maintaining was shattered, quickly and abruptly, as her assailant penetrated deeper and deeper. She screamed, amazed at the pain of first intercourse, which momentarily blotted out all other conscious thought. Lewis at last rolled off the terrified girl with his eyes closed, while somewhere in the recesses of his mind he exulted again, having punished Barbara Sewell one more time. The rest of the afternoon passed in a daze for Tammy Ann. Her only memory was of the wet towel that Lewis gave her to sit on during the drive back to town. The girl's sexual curiosity, never overwhelming, was non-existent now. Instead of a dreamlike state of tranquility, she wore the dumb look of a weary boxer going down for the last time. Lewis did not see Tammy Ann again until the day he was summoned to the commandant's office 2 months later. Being confronted by Tammy Ann and her parents, he argued back and forth with them. 2 major facts did emerge. Tammy Ann was pregnant. Tammy Ann was 13 years old. Full of righteous anger, Tammy Ann's parents disowned her and literally threw her out of the house. Their fury was justified in their eyes. The boy did the right thing and married the girl. Tammy Ann bore a son, Lewis Jr., on the eve of her 14th birthday. A month later, Lewis received orders to Korea. Tammy Ann remained behind, alone and scared. For a while, her only companion was the terrifying little thing that lay beside the young woman's bed each night, little Lewis Jr. The child did nothing for Tammy Ann's peace of mind, and soon the girl sought other companions near her own age. She began to see another soldier, a man named Edwards. The morals of the 1950s would not allow her to move in with him, but the result of their union brought another baby into her solitary apartment. Eddie was born the following spring. When Louis returned on leave, he was briefly dismayed by the second child, but he seemed to accept, almost expect it. Horrors were meant to be enjoyed, weren't they? Brenda Jean Campbell was a month old on Tammy Ann's 16th birthday. The only evidence of Louis for a while was part of his paycheck, and that was slow in coming. The only thing to look forward to was the end of summer. After 3 children in as many years, with a husband who came home only long enough to produce more, Tammy Ann began to lose control over her life and her mind. Tammy Ann watched herself daily before the merciless mirror, turning from a beautiful young woman into a careworn hag. She watched the dark circles gather around her once youthful eyes. She watched the worry lines form and deepen across her forehead. Her teeth hurt. The ruby red lips covered teeth that were decaying one by one, since she had no money for fillings. Her unconscious beauty had already blossomed, and now was rapidly fading away. Tammy Ann knew that what little comeliness she had left would soon be gone, and she would have no one to share it with. Her husband, when he returned from Korea, would be in the prime of his manhood. His letters were dwindling, and Tammy Ann wondered whether he would even come home at all. She had looked for and found the comfort of another man, but she had paid the price of that bargain in the coin of another child, when all she wanted was friendship. Her life had become nothing more than a glorified prison cell, whose boundaries were marked by the wail of a child, the specter of want, and the threat of eviction. There were odd jobs like waitressing, but the pay would not have covered the cost of a babysitter for an occasional night out. Tammy Ann was living the pathetic tragedy of a girl child, burdened with children of her own. She had unwittingly traded her prom dress for an apron, her gold earrings for a hairnet, her record player for the daily whine of the soap commercials. She was the independent woman idolized by popular magazines, but the dreams they promised had turned to dust. The morning schedule was grueling. Brenda Jean, the infant, required 9 meals a day. Johnny, the 1-year-old, was just learning how to crawl. Junior, the 2-year-old, was constantly investigating objects around the apartment, pulling them off tables and sending them crashing to the floor. Tammy Ann was trying to potty train Junior, but the results were discouraging. Dirty diapers lay everywhere. The afternoon schedule consisted of more housework, magnified 10 times by the interference of the children. Sweeping, dusting, scrubbing. Washing dishes, washing clothes and diapers was her only relief. Pervading all these activities was the drudgery of it all, the kneeling on hard linoleum floors and the nauseous smell, a mixture of equal parts of urine, feces, and ammonia. There was no honor and no rest in anything she did. One day, while feeding Brenda Jean, Tammy Ann heard Junior scream downstairs. Rushing down the hall with the infant in her arms, she tripped on the ragged carpet. To her horror, the baby slipped through her arms into the nothingness below. At the emergency room, while she waited for the baby to get 12 stitches and to be treated for a concussion, Tammy Ann wept uncontrollably as she considered the shambles of her life and those of the children. 4 months later, Tammy Ann made a fateful decision. Married for 3 years, pregnant for 3 years, Tammy Ann had grown too tired of the burden she alone had carried. Taking Eddie to his father's family, she locked Junior and Brenda Jean in the house after lunch and went shopping. At least, that's what she told herself. She passed the first store, then the second. By the time she passed the third, it was easier just to keep on going. The child who had no childhood of her own ran from the life she had grown to hate. The afternoon she left, the baby cried for its usual feeding, the sound descending in waves upon the ears of the 2-year-old boy. Being a big boy, he would not cry. He would not, he told himself. Even at 2, Junior was an intelligent boy. His diaper was heavy and smelled funny, and Mommy had not come to change it, so Junior tugged and grunted until the soaked thing fell away. He wandered from one room to the next, confused and afraid, listening for the familiar sounds of a car in the driveway. His baby sister's screams were muffled now, after 6 hours. Her esophagus was slowly swelling shut. The last sounds Junior heard that night were the infant's gagged sobs coming to him where he crouched in the recesses of his hiding place, deep in the bedroom closet. At last he fell asleep. When Junior awoke, he toddled into the kitchen in search of Mommy, who would be fixing breakfast as usual this time of the morning. Except today, she wasn't there. To the small child there was no real sense of time, only the remembrance of familiar faces and the good food smells which usually appeared as the sun came in through the big window. A glow around the curtained window suggested that another day had begun. It was time for breakfast. Junior reached for the handle of the big white box on the floor that Mommy always went to when she made the food come. When the oven door swung down, he could see the big round thing with legs. It was a chicken. Mom must have come back and fixed it while he was sleeping. A big smile spread across the boy's face as he dug his fingers deep into the dish. Food. The sun was sinking slowly past the door, illuminating a very small boy huddled in a corner of the empty house, enjoying the dinner Mommy made for him. Having eaten his fill, Junior remembered the baby who, in his anxiety, he had forgotten. Maybe she would like some dinner too, and tearing off a section of the bird, he wandered in the direction of the bedroom where the baby lay. The child lay in the bed, motionless. After 2 days of crying and thrashing about, the baby had managed to undress herself. She lay on a mattress, almost afloat in urea. The diaper held the excrement close to her body. All the windows of the house were closed and draped, but the September sun elevated the temperature to 95 degrees, so that the